This episode of Gators Breakdown is brought to you by MyBookie. MyBookie will match your first deposit by 50% all the way up to $1,000. Head to mybookie.ag and use promo code Gators to activate the offer. Bet, win, get paid at MyBookie.
Gators Breakdown, the Gators fan podcast, because there's never a dull moment in Gator Nation.
The Gators Breakdown podcast is ready to go. I'm your host, David Waters, and you can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SCC. Joining me on this episode is Will Sammon from The Athletic, and Will is joining us from the airport in Chicago on his way back from Columbia, Missouri. Will, after back-to-back losses to the Tigers the last 2 years for the Gators come away with a 23-6 win in its final SEC game of the season.
Absolutely, man. It probably wasn't the way that a lot of Gator fans drew it up in the beginning, but it got there at the end. So I guess the result is something that they'll take, especially considering that I think it spoke a lot to the team's sort of character that we sort of alluded to last week and in weeks prior, just about an ability to bounce back when you have some things on the line, but it's not everything on the line anymore. And so I thought that was something that was worth sort of saying at the onset, just because it kind of speaks to a couple of things that we've been talking about all season.
Absolutely. Still plenty to play for this team. And the SEC schedule's over with, and bye week FSU coming up. But, of course, we'll take a look at what happened in Columbia and how the Gators got to the 23-6 victory. But before we get there, remember you can find Gators Breakdown on news4jax.com/Gators Breakdown. You'll find all the Gators Breakdown episodes over there, and News4Jax coverage of the Gators there as well. Also listen and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, however you want to get Gators Breakdown. Plenty of options out there. When using those services, please share, rate, and review the show, and follow us on social media on Facebook and Twitter at Gators Breakdown. And Will, as you alluded to, man, another kind of slow start for these Gators. And every time it seemed like a drive would get going, we'd see Kyle Trask get sacked, or a large tackle for loss, a drop pass. It was a sloppy first half for the Gators offense, and third down offense was an issue the entire game. But 3 of 14 for the entire game, but started 0 for 3 in the first quarter, 1 for 5 in the second quarter. That puts us, at 1 for 8 at halftime. It's 6-3 Florida at halftime. And you felt Florida was somewhat in control of the game, but it was Missouri getting 4 sacks in the first half that held back some confidence that Florida could get this offense going. The Tigers defense abused the interior of the Gators offensive line and kept coming up and getting to Trask and affecting him. The run game is what it is at this point of the season. Will, we know Florida is a pass first team right now, but Missouri was able to just pin their ears back and get into the backfield and really limit what Florida could do in the first half on the offensive side of the ball.
Yeah, and like you just said, I don't care about the running game if I'm Florida that much, because I care about it, but not at the sense that we need to see Michael Pirine or Damian Pierce combined for 30 carries or 25 carries. That's not going to happen anymore. Not for the remainder of this season, unless something just goes completely different between now and the end of the bowl game, wherever they end up. This is who they've been for weeks. The problem with that is that pretty much everybody knows that now. So when you're playing a team like Missouri, which has a pretty good defense, they could, just adjust accordingly and disguise their pressures or make them a little bit more unique than maybe they had shown on film. And I think that's the reason why we saw some pressures up the middle that were just too much for Florida to handle. By the time, I think, the first sack, by the time Michael Pirine realized where the pressure was coming from, it was too late, because the guy had already zipped by him. And there's a variety of reasons why that kept happening. Particularly, it was up the middle, but the pressures on the outside were inconsistent. The blocking on the outside was inconsistent too, as far as the tackles go. They allowed some pressure, so Forsyth gave up a sack as well. So, not a great performance in the first half by the offensive line, which really kept Florida off schedule. And when you're looking at this team and you're saying to yourself, okay, what am I watching? Yeah, you're watching, you're hoping for a win if you're a Florida fan and you're watching this game and seeing what you have, but you're also sort of projecting for next year, I think, at this point too, just because there are only 2 games left. There's just 1 game in the regular season plus the bowl, so you're kind of looking in the back of your mind and saying, okay, who's getting better, who's developing, where are we at, what could be a strength next year, and right now I'm just not sure if the offensive line is something that I'm necessarily buying as far as this unit's going to be that much better next year. They got to show me a little something in these last 2 games. And I did think the group kind of clicked when Ethan White was on the field, as a matter of fact. And there could be a couple of different reasons why. Brett Heggie was dealing with some headaches and whatnot. That's why he was out last week. Maybe he wasn't 100% at the beginning. I don't know. And then Gene Delance was a little bit banged up. I saw him on the trainer's table a little bit during the second half. When I got down to the field, he looked okay. But, yeah, it just didn't seem like they were 100% out there. And the unit that worked the best, I thought, was with the true freshman on the field, Ethan White. So something to watch for, I guess, the next couple of weeks is to kind of continue to track his development and the development as the offensive line as a whole.
Absolutely. Like I brought up in the preview last week when I had Gabe DeArmond on from Power Mizzou. And look, the names that we discussed, Nick Bolton and Elliott Jordan and Whiteside here, that interior for the Missouri defensive line going against that, what we knew the interior with Garage and Heggie and White, we thought they'd be a problem and for that little trio and Buchanan at center as well. We thought the interior of the Missouri defensive line would give Florida a little bit of issues. And I just noticed I had a little bit of time to kind of go back and rewatch some of the game, not an entire rewatch just yet, but and we'll get into Emory Jones in just a second, but you brought it up, Ethan White coming in, and I found it interesting when Emory Jones came in, Ethan White came in as well, but it was Brett Heggie who slid to left guard, not Richard Garage. Richard, I guess they took out Garage at left guard. They slid Heggie over to left guard. Ethan White was in at right guard. So, yeah, it was, like you said, I think they're still trying to figure out pieces that maybe are pieces that will be or they're definitely going to be instrumental next season. But as you're saying, they may be tinkering with some combinations out there of how they're going to insert White, Garage, and Heggie there to kind of see. We know there's going to be an opening at center next year, but I kind of agree with you. I think they're maybe trying to figure out a combination there of the guards to try and get something going.
Yeah, and I think Delance was out for a couple of series. I'm not sure if that was because he needed a break physically or it was performance. I'm not sure. The question wasn't asked in the post-game because it just wasn't that pressing after the game.
Yeah.
But we'll probably find out throughout the week, if not the next week after that, ahead of the Florida State game. But yeah, man. Also, though, so Kyle Trask, he's a lot better, I think, with picking up the pressure and knowing to get rid of the ball. But there were a couple of times where, you knew that time was running out on those sacks. Like maybe it's because we have the advantage of seeing the play unfold and we're not looking for wide receivers,
Yeah.
And so like it's a little bit easier for us as viewers. But you could kind of tell that time was ticking, and as much progress as he's made in recognizing when to get rid of the ball, he still has a little bit ways to go. He's getting better. He's gotten a lot better. But what I'm trying to say is that he could still there's still room to grow there. And we noticed that in the second half. I felt like he was getting the ball out a lot quicker when they did make a couple of those changes. They were getting the ball out very, very much more efficiently to the wide receivers. It was the first read or the second read, and he didn't have to scan the field. Part of that, though, is because Missouri played well. They have a really good secondary, and they played like it. They played a lot of man coverage, and oftentimes guys were able to jar the balls loose against the Florida receivers, or it was just tough for them to get open uncharacteristically.
Yeah, that's exactly where I'm going next. Keeping with the offense here, we mentioned there were 4 sacks by Missouri in the first half. So what happens in the second half? Florida doesn't give up a sack. And as you mentioned, Kyle Trask can be contributed with that, but the offensive line can as well. 4 sacks for Missouri in the first half, none in the second half, and that helped leads. So that helped lead to a dominant third quarter for the second week in a row for the Gators. Florida comes out after halftime, scores 14 points compared to Missouri's 3. Trask goes 10 of 12 for 127 yards. The 2 touchdown passes to Josh Hammond and LaMichael Pirine. And those were some great throws and catches, great placement from Trask, and great adjustments and catches by Hammond and Pirine. So credit to the quarterback and the receivers there. Florida averaged 9.9 yards per play, ran 14 plays there, and only had 2 third downs, converting one of them in the third quarter. So, Will, I'm not sure what Mullen tells these guys at halftime, but it's worked the last 2 weeks. Part of it is Florida is the better team, so it should play out this way. But when things aren't going their way in the first half the last couple of weeks, the offense puts together a third quarter that is the difference in the games.
What's kind of significant, I feel like, when you're analyzing like the first and the second halves for Florida, is if you look at like the first drives for the Gators, a lot of times, there are some exceptions, but it's not often where you have like that 10 play drive, 70 yards opening drive touchdown. Doesn't really happen too often, right? So it's like, I kind of feel like as an X's and O's type of coach that Dan Mullen is, a lot of times the defense is doing something that they saw on film that they're trying to do something to prevent what Florida's good at. And come the second half, I think Dan Mullen figures it out, where we do see those methodical drives more frequently in the second halves. Sometimes they do hit some explosive plays in the first half of games, and that had allowed them to kind of get upfield quickly, of course, and make it a little bit easier. But when that doesn't happen, it's just not too often where you see those long methodical drives that you do, say, in the third quarters of games or in the fourth quarters of games like we've seen in the past.
Absolutely. Up and down day for Trask. All in all, looked good on the touchdown throws, but had some inexplicable throws that should have been intercepted, and good chances those are pick six if they're caught. At the end of the day, 23 of 35 for 282 yards, 2 touchdowns. As we mentioned, the pressure in his face much of the day. No help from the traditional run game. And there were going to be chances for Trask to pass the ball all over the field with the Missouri and the kind of the one safety high man defense that they were playing. Wasn't pretty at times, but just looking at the numbers, Will, on the surface of numbers, he keeps putting up big numbers.
Well, yeah, he does. Like you mentioned, there were those 2 that I think went through the defenders got a hand on a couple of those that would be interceptions, and then there was another one too. But on the other side of that, there were a couple of drops for Florida's receivers, particularly Jacob Copeland. I thought the throw to Pitts, I believe it was in the second quarter, where it was in the end zone.
Oh yeah,
the defender made a really good play on that ball, but that's a pass that Kyle Pitts usually catches, I feel like. And so there were a couple that went either way against him. He has to do a better job, though, of like not making those throws that make you hold your breath. There's maybe like one of those a game. It's an improvement over Felipe Franks, who I felt like did it a little bit more frequently. And nobody's going to be perfect. I mean, it's college football. You're going to get that. I mean, unless you're like Tua or maybe Burrow this year, it's like we're asking these guys to like do the impossible here, where it's like you got to play a perfect game. It's like it ain't going to happen. So I mean, we're nitpicking because the kid's played well. He's played above what anybody could have reasonably expected out of him, and to lead another win like this. The defense I think is why they won the game, but the senior playmakers and Kyle Trask, you got to score some points, and they've been very, very reliable and dependable when it comes down to running the play, finding a mismatch, and really hitting it at the right time. And that's what we saw in the second half against Missouri.
Well, I did want to, I want to go there for a second. Shout out to your article at The Athletic, and I brought it up last week too on the podcast. I brought it up with Ben Troop as well. This veteran group, and of course, senior day is coming up against FSU, the last home game of the season, and the last time we'll get to see Swain, Hammond, Cleveland. That group of Michael Pirine, speaking for the offense right now. See those group of guys come out of the tunnel in the swamp, and they were instrumental in this season, turning it around from Jim McElwain, and these first 2 seasons under Dan Mullen. As good as I think kind of the theme of your article there. For as much credit as we give Dan Mullen for coming in and changing this. Instilling the Gator standard, but the players have got to be receptive of it, and more than likely, that group I just mentioned, and a lot of other leaders on the defensive side of the ball. It takes those group of guys also to kind of take it all into and filter it down to the younger players on the team.
Well put. And what people people know that. I feel like that the Gators are going to lose a bunch next year. That's not to say that they're going to be worse or all that different either. But what I think goes a little bit understated is it's not just the talent that Florida will be graduating and losing in those 4 wide receivers plus Michael Piron, because they have talent in Jacob Copeland, Kadarius Toney, Trevin Grimes if he comes back as a junior, and Damian Pierce at running back. Like, those guys are super talented. There's no question about that. It's just the seniors are talented too, but what makes them different is just how reliable they are. They know the playbook. They know the playbook inside and out. They know what they're doing on routes. They look like as if they never make mistakes. And we were just joking about Kyle Trask and quarterbacks and asking for perfection with them. With Hammond, Swain, Van Jefferson, Michael Pirine, I mean, you almost get perfection with those guys. It's almost like your jaw's on the floor when they drop a pass or something like that, because it's just they don't do that. And their reliability is just something that I'm not saying that they're gonna lose more games next year or what, but there's probably going to be times where you're like, okay, too bad there's not Freddie Swain out there in the slot or Josh Hammond to catch this pass, to just move the chains for you, or Van Jefferson to target like he was against Missouri in that first quarter, where he's moving the chains for you every down, just going to him, and he's picking up yards. Same like he did against LSU for that drive. It's just it goes understated, I think, in my opinion, and I just thought that was a good opportunity late in the season, like we said, because it's getting to that point where it's like, this is the 2019 Florida Gators. We know who they are, but there's only 2 games left. So what are we talking about now? We're talking about where the team may be in 2 games from now when we're projecting the future. And it's not going to be with these guys, but Dan Mullen's very hopeful that their legacy of, working overtime, putting in the work, absorbing the playbook, and being unselfish will have a trickle-down effect to the rest of the roster. We'll see, because that's asking for a lot in college football.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, one of the bigger headlines again is the usage of Emory Jones, and how the rotation is being used between him and Kyle Trask. Again, it just doesn't feel right. Jones' first appearance is in the first quarter, where he starts a drive on the Gators' own 20-yard line. As I mentioned, Ethan White comes in here too at right guard. Hagee goes over at left guard on this drive. On the first play, Jones rushed for 10 yards on 1st and 10. Then the reverse to Toney goes for a loss of 8. Jones then runs for 14 yards on 2nd down, setting up a 3rd and 4. Mullen decides to take Jones out, insert Trask for a pass that falls incomplete. Then the next time we see Jones is on the we see him on a play after Trask starts to drive, throws to Pitts for 3 yards from the Gators' own 37-yard line. Jones comes in, runs for 4, then runs for 5 to get a 1st down. Then he completes a 48-yard underthrown pass to Kadarius Toney. Very next play, Jones rushed for a yard on 1st down, down to the Missouri 5-yard line. Emory Jones is then taken out again. Kyle Trask almost does the interception on the next play. Then on 3rd and goal, Trask and Toney can't get together on the diving try in the end zone. Will, it just looks rough. It's not smooth out there right now when this happened. The play calling is very predictable when Jones is out there. But what isn't predictable is when Jones will come on or when he's taken off the field. So he doesn't get to finish drives when the game is close. It looks like it affects Trask's rhythm a bit when he's asked to come in and throw after Emory Jones has been on the field. So, man, I just find it weird that, when Trask went down versus Auburn, we saw Jones use his arm to drive Florida down the field and a little more of the offense from him. But lately it's, been a big majority of run plays with very little passing. So, now look, Dan Mullen knows what goes on behind the scenes in the film room and on the practice field. But it does, at least on the surface from here, as a faraway viewer, the rotation just looks clunky.
Yeah, so I think you were getting at it when you said we don't really know when Emory Jones – we don't know at all, actually, when Emory Jones is going to appear in a game, but we have a very good idea what he's going to do. And that's run the ball. So does it really matter when he appears if we know what he's going to do?
Yeah.
There goes the surprise almost. But I will say, though, that it looks as if Dan Mullen is using Emory Jones, obviously, right, as part of a running game, where similar to Kadarius Toney, like we saw against Missouri, where he was in the Wildcat, he got that jet sweep as well earlier before the Wildcat appearance. They're part of a running game that is non-traditional, to say the least. And so you've got to keep the defense somewhat honest here, so that we don't see the 4 or 5 sack games like that. And one way to do that is to use Emory Jones as a runner. It's interesting because Kyle Trask is getting better as a runner, though.
Mm-hmm.
And we saw him run that speed option. It looked a little weird because he was like, the defender was trying to read it, and it was just kind of funny because
he just held on to the ball.
what he was going to do, yeah. But he just held on to it, and that was the right decision. It was kind of funny because you were just waiting for him to fling the ball over to, I guess it was Pirine, whoever was running back on that play, and he never does. And it's a great play because if he does, it's going to be a fumble, you feel like, because that just has a nightmare written all over it for the Gators. But he held on to it, makes right reads in touching it and keeping the ball and going. And we're seeing more of that. We're seeing more comfort from Kyle Trask as a runner. And so it just makes you think that, hey, if he can keep evolving and maybe the offensive line gets better, I'm not saying he's going to be like Felipe Franks last year, because I thought last year Felipe Franks was great as a runner. I'm not sure if he gets to that level. Not that Felipe was the best I've ever seen. I'm not saying that before people get crazy about that statement, but I did think that he was pretty good. But, yeah, so we'll see, because I'd like to see Emory Jones, like you're saying, throw the ball more. Dan Mullen was asked point blank toward the end of the press conference, what does Emory Jones sort of have to do to earn more throws, or to maybe build your trust in him for him to be out there and throw some passes? And he said he kind of just answered around the question and said, I have complete trust in Emory Jones. And then he went back to the idea of neither guy is questioning it. Nobody's asking if they're really questioning it. We're just kind of questioning why we don't see Emory Jones throw the ball more. I suspect that we will. It's just a hunch that in these last 2 games, Florida State and the Bowl, he will throw a couple of passes, but that's just a guess on my part, just based off of what Dan Mullen has said about slowly getting him more involved in that offensive play calling and opening it up a bit more. That was a phrase that he used after the game, opening it up a bit more. What does that mean? I'm thinking that we'll see in the next couple of games, but not something I'd necessarily bet on, just a kind of a guess.
Yeah, and more guessing here from my side. When Kyle Trask went down versus Auburn, it didn't look good. It really didn't. We didn't know if he was going to play again. We didn't know if he was going to come back at that point. But it didn't look good. So, I don't know if that played into it or not. And, with the play calling behind Emory, because, maybe Dan Mullen thought, okay, well, I don't know when Kyle Trask will come back, if he comes back. So, here's the offense. Here's what it is. And Emory Jones can run it. And, they called the plays like Emory Jones has been playing for 2 seasons at quarterback. There were a good bit of passes. They were mixing him in the run game. So that's kind of that's where I always go back to is, why'd you let him throw so much there in the middle of the season against, the game was still, of course, in question. That game was never out of question, but, you kind of needed to go put some points up. I think it was right before halftime, so you're trying to get some points before halftime, and there's Emory Jones throwing the ball down the field.
Yeah, it's a great question, man. And I thought particularly like against Missouri, they took him out on 3rd and 4, and they reinserted Kyle Trask.
Yeah,
is that correct? 3rd and 4. So it's like, I feel like that's a down where I honestly want Emory Jones in on that down, just because he was picking up yards in the running game for you. I'm not saying you have to run there, but I just had a good feeling of him. And again, I said this before, but I'm more of like an analytical based person. So for me to say I had a good feeling about it kind of hurts my heart. But I did have a feeling that he was going to pick that up if he was left in the game for whatever it's worth. Probably not much, but just based off the flow of it, yeah, it's one of those things like you can't prove like, okay, Kyle Trask is going to make that completion if he stays in the game. And if you take him out there, there it goes. It disrupts his rhythm. It disrupts his flow. You can't really prove it, but afterward, it certainly appears that way sometimes.
Yeah, because the rotation to me in the LSU game, it kind of worked. It helped Florida in that game. So it's just weird. You go back and of course the relationship and connection of Tebow and Leak, and fast forwarding it to now. So we know Dan Mullen has a feel for rotating quarterbacks. It's just right now lately, this one's looked a little clunky. So let's go to the other side of the ball, and kudos to this defense in the first half to holding Missouri to 3 first half points. letting the Florida offense eventually figure it out. Kelly Bryant was coming back and starting for the Missouri Tigers, and the hope for them is that it would help a struggling offense, but it really didn't. Last couple of years, Missouri's been able to hop on Florida from the get-go with a struggling Florida offense, and it was imperative for this defense to make plays where so Missouri couldn't get out to a lead, and that continued in the second half where Florida only gives up another field goal. We saw the defense attack Will and get in the backfield, play sound football most of the day. Missouri ended the day with just 256 yards of total offense.
For the most part, I thought the Gators tackled pretty well too. There was a couple of plays where C.J. Henderson whiffed on that Kelly Bryant scramble. That comes to mind as a big one, but there weren't too many of them. And I'll point while I'm talking about corners real quick. Kyrie Elam had a nice play on like a 3rd and 14, may have been the second quarter, if not the first quarter. He made a tackle on Missouri's tight end Alberto, and that's a big man to get down. It wasn't like a sure tackle. It wasn't like a one-on-one stop like a Sean Davis like monster hit, but he got him down, and that's what the Gators have needed all season, is for their secondary to make tackles like that. Because maybe he breaks that tackle if it's not Kyrie Elam, and maybe he goes for an additional 5 or 6 yards pick with the first down, and then who knows what happens from there. But Kyrie Elam, I thought, played well. A long list of defensive guys that played well. At the top of my list for defense is Marco Wilson, though. I thought at the star position, he looked like a natural. He came up huge on that tackle for loss. The first series for Missouri, just read that play beautifully. Perfect execution. Zach Carter helped him out. He didn't get enough love during the game, but Zach Carter really set the edge there and disallowed Bryant to make a play or to kind of scramble for yardage if he wanted to, and that forced him to kind of make the swing pass, and then Marco Wilson was right there to stop it. So he played well. Of course, he had an interception to kind of put the icing on the cake at the end. But it was good to see, because you thought to yourself, right, David, that like it was going to work, him at the star position, just because it made sense. Cerebral guy, knows defense, excellent in the secondary. But it was also just nice to kind of see it, because it's one thing to talk about it and say that's the right move, but it kind of confirmed that was the right move to make.
And it come at a time, Will, where we've questioned this secondary of, look, they've played good this year, but maybe not living up to the expectation that we thought that they would have coming in. We expect Marco Wilson, C.J. Henderson, and this is jokingly saying, to never have a pass completed on them. Of course they are. Of course it's going to happen. But maybe they haven't lived up to quite the expectation that most people had coming into this season. And you wondered how he would take a move to moving positions. More than likely his final season at Florida. Outside cornerback to make a ton of money in the NFL. He's coming back from an injury. Probably wants to put on tape. He's put enough on tape, of course, for the NFL to see right now. But you wondered how he would take it, this late in the season, if his head would be in the game of having to move position, something. But I know he said, look, now he gets to put more on film, more on tape for the NFL, because now he's playing another position. And of course, the NFL teams are going to look at that. So, good for that, because it needed to happen. As you said, Trey Dean was out there struggling in the nickel star position. Georgia really abused him early on in that game, and we haven't seen him much there since that point of the season. And absolutely credit to Marco for being able to go out there and still make something happen, still, be a great teammate, go out there and help this defense. And look, we don't talk about Kyrie Elam enough, and that's probably a good thing, because, corners, when you get talked about a lot, most of the time it's not for good headlines. It's a lot of time for negative headlines. But he's out there as a true freshman. I'm glad you brought him up, because and it's not for the negativity. We're not calling a cornerback out, because most of the time when the cornerback gets noticed, it's because of a bad play that happened.
Yeah, or an interception.
Yeah.
But with Kyrie Elam, it's like he's just making the right plays. And like that deep pass against Vanderbilt, he was there for it. It was really the only time anybody was really tested in the secondary, so I remember it. But yeah, I mean, he looks like he belongs. And not only that he belongs, but he looks like he could really be a major player in the SEC as far as your top corners go. I know it's a lot to say about a true freshman, but I honestly believe that, man, next year, particularly if like we expect at least one, if not both, corners leave, Florida's still, I feel like, in good hands with Kyrie Elam. I think you could do a lot worse than a second-year guy like that and just saying, hey, you're who we have. Because if you look at his advanced stats, he has the best numbers in the entire secondary when it comes down to QB rating against, completion percentage against, yards per attempt allowed is super low. So that indicates that even the catches that he is allowing, they're in front of him. So, he's been excellent, man. It will be interesting to see how he performs in the last two games, of course, to keep that positive momentum going for him. But also in the secondary, man, I thought Sean Davis did well. I thought he tackled well. I thought Donovan Steiner played really well.
Yep.
He had a notable pass breakup in the first quarter that I remember. So just all around, you got to really like what you saw, and it showed up in the statistics. But you go across the position groups, defensive line, I saw David Turner, the defensive line coach, tweet that only 5 dudes showed up ready to play. Not showed up, you know what I mean? Just ready to play. Yeah. Because they were without Jabari Zuniga again, so they had to work with what they had, and what they had wasn't a whole lot. But those guys were ready, man. They were impressive. Schuler, Campbell, usual guys, but also Slayton's been really good as of late.
Yeah.
He looks very much improved. That's good to see for the Gators. I mentioned Zach Carter also played well. So, yeah, you got good performances across the board. And you keep going, man. James Houston made some plays.
Yeah.
Dontrell Miller made some tackles. It was just a complete performance by the defense that probably didn't get enough credit when that result hit because of the slow start by the offense in the first half and the big plays they made in the second half.
They hounded Kelly Bryant all day. 3 total sacks. Could have had a few more. Kelly Bryant good at escaping the pocket there a good bit of the time. But 10 tackles for loss. Third game in a row where the opposing run game just hasn't really been able to get going. Missouri with 52 yards on the ground. Game started with a 3-and-out, ended with a Marco Wilson interception. Complete performance from this defense. And, look, in their 5 home games, Missouri entered the game averaging 40.4 points a game. This lowest single total being 34 against South Carolina. Florida held them to 6. Averaging 40 points at home, Florida held them to 6. The Tigers averaged 461 total yards at home. Gators held them to 256. Missouri averaged 216 rushing yards at home. Florida held them to 52. And, you can't give enough credit, I don't think, to Jonathan Greenard. 2 sacks, 5 tackles for loss. Entered the day with 4 sacks, 7 tackles for loss here, so adds to that total. And Florida says, Greenard's 5 tackles for loss were the most by a Gator in the game since at least 2000. And it was also announced on Sunday he is the recipient of the Walter Camp Defensive Player of the Week award. Will, man, he looks healthy. It's clear he makes the defense better overall. He's pressuring the quarterback. He's sacking the quarterback. He's blowing up run plays. He's setting the edge in the run game. It's clear to see his impact when he's out there against LSU and South Carolina. The run defense looked pretty pedestrian. Competition played a part, but Greenard is instrumental in this defense playing its best. The entire defensive line benefits from him being out there, and man, we can only imagine. But it's a shame we only got to see him and Zuniga together so very little.
Yeah, man, absolutely. That's like you saw that Miami game, and you're like, oh man, this pass rush is something else. And it really could have been if these guys stayed healthy. I felt like, they weren't going to get 10 sacks versus LSU, but could they have gotten at least one or 2 stops if both of those dudes are healthy? You would think, right?
Yeah. And
that's really all they kind of needed to make it even more of a game than what it was. They only lost by 2 touchdowns in that game. So, yeah, man, it is a shame for Florida that had to happen, particularly for Jabari Zuniga, because that's a guy who kind of came back. Yeah. And I know his draft stock is not necessarily going to be severely impacted one way or the other. People know that he's pretty good. I think a big season, of course, would have vaulted him higher, but I'm not sure if this injury-riddled season will really decrease his stock much, just because a lot of people in the NFL know what he's capable of. It's just, he came back to play. You know what I mean? It's like he came back to play. So if you put even the NFL draft stuff aside for a second and you just say to yourself, wow, this was a dude who came back, played, could have had a huge season in the SEC where everybody was talking about him. Now the only time we really talk about Jabari Zuniga is when we're talking about his ankle. And that's kind of a shame for him because he's a good talent. Kid works hard. He was somebody that they obviously counted on, and for good reason. Todd Grantham also mentioned that he's been helpful with the younger guys too, and that hasn't been talked about a whole lot, but he has been around, even though he's not been able to fully participate like in practices and obviously in games, but he's been helpful to guys, it seems, if you take Todd Grantham for his word on that. So, yeah, and Jonathan Greenard, man, it's like, if you think about earlier in our conversation when we were talking about the offensive guys, how hard they will be able to replace just based off the intangibles that they bring, let alone the production. The same can be said about Greenard, and you kind of say to yourself, man, Brenton Cox better be pretty good because they're losing a whole lot in that pass rush. And I like Diabate. I like Chris Bogle. Those are going to be really two good young players in the conference as early as next year probably. But, man, they're going to need Brenton Cox to be a five-star talent because you're not going to have Jonathan Greenard, who made that defense really what it is right now, night and day in what they're able to do versus this year versus last year when he's on the field in, just setting the edge, playing disciplined, making plays and finishing plays, night and day difference. And they're not going to have that next year, but they need Brenton Cox to be a five-star talent.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we'll get into some tweets right quick before we let Will go. But before we get there, you're the type of fan that knows football so well that you could choose any game and call it. Well, MyBookie is the place for you as they let you turn all your sports knowledge into cash into your wallet. Between football season, NBA, college basketball season, it's time to get off the sideline and get in on the action over at MyBookie. If you're the kind who likes to bet a little and win a lot, then try a parlay. Pick your locks for the week, put them together in one parlay bet, and when they all come through, the rewards will be huge. Tired of watching the game from the couch with nothing to gain? Then head over to MyBookie right now. MyBookie will match your deposit by 50% all the way up to $1,000. Use promo code GATORS to activate the offer. Visit MyBookie online today at mybookie.ag. That's MYBOOKIE.ag. And don't forget to use promo code GATORS when creating your account to claim the bonus. Bet, win, get paid at MyBookie. And after every game, of course, I want your listeners out there to reach out to me on Twitter and I get your reaction. So let's start here with Alexander Alza. And he says, it's bittersweet since we're not going to Atlanta. However, the collapse the Gators had against Missouri the last couple of years, it's not just nice to get this Tiger off of our backs. This is another notch of progress under Dan Mullen. Gator 1 at Gators 1205 says, bottom line, huge win to keep the momentum of the season going in the right direction towards defeating FSU and building on recruiting. This is all a building process. Mullen understands that more than anyone. And, well, yeah, I mean, of course, there's been some conversation out there that since the Georgia game and that loss, of course, we had to wait for some results. But, maybe the Gators don't have anything to play for. But, we've had this conversation before, and good on this team for going out and destroying Vanderbilt and going to Missouri and finally beating Missouri after getting pounded 2 seasons in a row from this team. And there were plenty of things to play for, still plenty to play for, and one more game to end the season in the Swamp, finish undefeated, beat your most hated in-state rival here. A lot of recruits are going to be there. It was good to keep this positive momentum going and the Gators in a positive light to end another season.
They did what they were supposed to do so far this year with one game left. They won all the games that many people predicted that they would win, plus they won a top 10 matchup versus Auburn at home, which some people said that they would win, some people said that they would lose, but it wasn't necessarily the same sure win, of course, that you would place with the other ones. So they accomplished what is no small feat in doing that either, because it's easy to say, in the beginning of the year when you and I are talking and we're looking at the schedule and we're placing W's and L's next to these games, it's easy for us to do that, just assume that it's going to happen, but we know that that's not always the case here. So they accomplished pretty much exactly what I think the consensus was as far as like the wins. I don't know about 10 wins. They probably got a couple more than a lot of people thought. But I figured that they would be a 9-win team at, if things kind of broke, a couple of bad losses in there with LSU and Georgia. I thought that could have gone either way, but I still figured that they were going to be a 9-win team at the beginning of the year. And so for them to kind of be in a position to get 10, I feel like it's a successful season, even though you don't beat Georgia and you don't win the SEC East.
Yeah, championships of course are the goal at Florida. But we were in Birmingham when the media picked Florida to finish second in the East, and hey, look, that's what happened. So in the wide scope of things, Florida met the expectation in kind of one way of looking at it. They're going to finish, they finished second in the SEC East, and fought tooth and nail against Georgia. So close game there, but of course, yeah, like you said, 10 wins to play for, an improvement over last season to get 10 regular season wins. Here we go. Neil Bennett says a great defensive effort early to keep Missouri from scoring and maintaining small lead. Great throughout the entire game. A lot of teams, including some Gator teams in recent history, would have not pulled away late for a win, or would have given up points and couldn't have come back. And yeah, Gator fans have felt that too many times in recent years under previous regimes. A good Twitter name here, Will. Chicken Tender Pub Sub. There we go.
Nice.
Yeah, still says good to see the team play solid for the most part, knowing there was still a slim chance to win the SEC East. A few head scratcher decisions on offensive play calling, but we don't know what Mullen's really thinking. Trying things out, getting people playing time, so it's fine. We did kind of hit on that. We'll getting some people, getting some players some playing time here, but also going back to kind of the veteran leadership of this team. As he says here, good to see the team play solid for the most part, knowing there was a slim chance to win the East. And I always go back to the point of, look, these seniors, these veterans have been through a lot with the coaching change. It got so ugly under Jim McElwain, crazy headlines during that time, and now they get to reap the rewards.
Yeah, it's well deserved for those guys. I mean, they stuck it out, and we're seeing a team that looks that way. Like they look like they've been through some things, like
Yeah.
because of the way they carry themselves, because they're so mature is what I'm trying to get at. Like you meet somebody and they kind of go over like all the things that they've been through in life. Oh, okay, yeah, that's why you are the way you are, right? And for this team, it's like they've gone through some wild things over the past few seasons, and they've also won though too. Last year they experienced winning, and that was important too. So they know how to do that. They know how to win games, and they've also overcome some craziness. And so it's a combination that leads to some maturity and some growth. And I feel like that's why they were able to kind of pull away with this win and make the Vanderbilt win last week the way that people wanted to see it. It should have been a blowout. It should have been a complete no contest, and it was. And this they should have ran away with, and they did. It wasn't perfect, but it wasn't anything to really be upset about either at all.
Right, injuries, losing your quarterback, losing Kadarius Toney, Zuniga, Greenard, Henderson. I mean, all missed times, and Gators end up, keep fighting and getting fighting for 10 wins on the season as well. Last few here at Jab 2375, another great defensive performance. So I was happy to see Trask throw some 50-50 balls. Ethan White's going to be a beast on the offensive line. A couple more offensive notes here, Will, to get your thoughts on. We'll hit on the Trask and the 50-50 balls, but also Tyrone Shields says, gritty win against a team that's had our number, no issues with quarterback rotation. 11 is the starter. Still think LaMichael Pirine is the best running back on the team by far. No running back in UF history could run behind this offensive line. Wide receivers steady, definitely played well. 9-2, baby. A couple things, the 50-50 balls to Trevon Grimes, I don't think we see enough of those. That was good to see as well. But look, I mean, LaMichael Pirine, we talked about these veterans, and we've hit that enough. And there's a reason he's on the field. And going back to the Peach Bowl last week and the tunnel screen that was implemented, and we saw him be a receiver in that game that made a big difference in that game. And man, that catch he made yesterday, you couldn't have told me if he was a wide receiver or a running back if I didn't know who he was.
Oh, it was great, man. To be able to concentrate like that and keep your foot in bounds, corral that catch with really two guys, because it was one-on-one with a linebacker, which was clearly what they wanted. But also the safety came over and helped out a little bit too when that ball was getting thrown. So it was really between two defenders, and so that was pretty impressive. But I think the person who sent that tweet is correct, and it doesn't take much to realize that, but. It's like there was some talk earlier in the year about, well, is it LaMichael Pirine? Is it the offensive line? I mean, look, they're still trying to run a couple of short yardage situations on 3rd and 2 and 2nd and short, and one in particular comes to mind with Damian Pierce on the field where it wasn't his fault, but he got 0 yards and was just pushed back at the line. I mean, it was just terrible. I think that was like a 2nd and 2 situation. So it's like, yeah, you kind of feel for the dude in Michael Pirine, where this was his senior year, and he didn't put up the rushing yards that a lot of people thought he would, myself included. But it wasn't really his fault. Just couldn't get anything going with that offensive line this year as far as run blocking goes, on a consistent basis at least. There were some flashes, but nothing consistently game to game.
Absolutely. Last thought here, and get Will's thoughts on what happened around the SEC. Cameron Harris says, sloppy early, but once again we adjusted and found a way to win. The team went on the road in chilly weather, beat someone who's given us a hard time. We are 9-2, have an opportunity to win 10 games at home versus FSU. Be proud of this team. Go Gators. So good message there from Cameron. And thanks for everybody for sending those out there. And Will, definitely got to get your thoughts here on what happened in the SEC yesterday. A lot of headlines before I let you go. Man, ugly injury. Tua Tagovailoa goes down for Alabama. They win 38-7 over Mississippi State, but man, that's tough to see. You know, he's fighting through injury. He wants to play. He wants to be out there with his teammates, and you know, injuries are part of the game. But that was tough to see for a good guy out there.
For sure, man. It was bad, and it's one of those things where like everybody who follows college football just kind of like stops from like the game that they're watching, and they kind of go on Twitter and they just say, "Wow," because you know Tua was that all-world talent, or is that all-world talent. But by all accounts, he's also, you know, people say he's such a great guy as well, just a good person, good-hearted. It seems like handled the thing with Hurts very well, I thought, publicly. The last couple of seasons, and nobody needs me to say it, but I mean the guy was still in the running for the Heisman, even though Burrow was probably the front runner at this point. But yeah, it's just terrible to kind of see. Especially Nick Saban said when he was interviewed about it on the field that they were going to take him out anyway after that series. Like they were just kind of practicing their 2-minute offense. So it's just an absolute shame, really is. And then you kind of go into like what it means for the just college football landscape as far as the playoff goes. But I wouldn't expect Alabama to be in there just because that's going to be held against them, because part of their deal was the eye test.
Yeah,
and that gets compromised without one of the best quarterbacks in the country.
Yeah, absolutely. And run through here. Auburn gave us hope late, but of course Georgia wins 21-14. Auburn storms back in the fourth quarter, makes it interesting after Georgia jumps up 21-0. But at the end of the day, Will, Georgia wraps up their 3rd straight SEC East crown, and Florida will be sitting home when we figured when Florida couldn't get it done in Jacksonville, this was going to be the case. But it was still worth noting that Georgia hasn't played all too great this year, but are finding a way to win games with that. I mean, that really good defense. And Georgia wins the SEC East by beating Auburn 21-14.
Yeah, man, that pass from Bo Nix really ruined things for Auburn.
Man,
he just was in such a hurry on that throw. Just if he would have just set his feet, it would have been a totally different situation. But yeah, the reality is that Georgia's there. They'll still be, I guess, in the top 4 of the playoff, which matters. But they're not going to stay there unless they beat LSU in the championship.
Right. Yep.
And so that's what we're going to have to see. And we'll see how good Georgia is, because LSU I don't think is unbeatable, but they're as tough as it gets. Clearly, they're number 1 for a lot of reasons. And their offense is just, if Alabama couldn't stop them, I'm not sure if anybody can.
Yeah, absolutely there. So Kentucky 38-14 over Vanderbilt, as Kentucky 528 yards of offense there. So crazy with Lynn Bowden at quarterback that they're putting up 38 points. But Vanderbilt pretty bad team right now there. But Kentucky was down 14-3 at one point in that game there. So LSU 58-37. Ole Miss came back in the third quarter within a couple scores. Trying to put a drive together to get within a touchdown, but didn't happen. LSU wins there 58-37, and then Texas A&M 30-6 over South Carolina. South Carolina kind of falling apart after beating Georgia earlier this season and haven't really been able to capitalize at all on that. So, Will, before I let you go, man, what you got coming up on the Athletic in the next couple of days?
Well, we're going to do some recruiting stuff. I think that's what's on a lot of people's minds lately.
Yep.
As we head into not just the end of the regular season, but also early signing period is just around the corner. At this point, a couple of weeks away. So it creeps up on you fast. It's already November 17th as we're talking now. So I think just a month away exactly at this point. But before you know it, it's going to be quick. So it'll be there. So probably go through some of the more interesting recruits, either committed or who are targets of Florida, and write stories about them. For the guys who are committed, I find this commit list to be pretty talented and also super interesting as well. I think that they've done really well on the defensive line so far, and they've also had some interesting names that I'm curious to see how they'll pan out in the future. A couple of under-recruited players is who I'm referring to. So I'll be working on some of that stuff. Plus, we're going to be issuing our all-decade team for the 2010s for Florida. So that was something that, Dave, you're familiar with, and having a conversation with me. I picked the brains of some other folks as well. So it is a fun exercise. I'm glad it's over, and I'm eager to release it because it was difficult. Let's just say the McElwain and the Muschamp years did not lend itself to some long list of running backs and quarterbacks to choose from.
Absolutely there. So yeah, look for that coming up from Will and the Athletic. A lot of good stuff coming up. We'll be hitting recruiting, on the Gators Breakdown this week as well, with the bye week coming up a week before FSU. Will, man, I can't thank you enough for joining me on your travels back from Columbia on the way back to Gainesville. Safe travels, man, and we'll talk to you again the Sunday, the day after Florida State.
Season goes by fast, man. Appreciate it as always. Looking forward to it.
All right, well, that's Will Sammon from The Athletic. I am David Waters, host of Gators Breakdown. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. Guys and girls out there, thanks for listening to this episode of Gators Breakdown.